Hi, Sarah. Sarah, I'm sure a couple of other colleagues will join us as we go on. Yep, I can. Morning, Dan. Hello, Hayley. Fine, thank you. It's 10 o'clock. I believe the recording has started. Welcome, everybody, to the December meeting of School Forum. Hi, Kerry. I'm sure a couple of colleagues will be joining over these next couple of minutes, but let's get started. Madeline, could I ask if we have any apologies for attendance?
Amanda Woodfin, and she's been substituted by the school's business manager.
Yeah, morning, Paul. Chris here.
Hi, Chris. Morning to you. I've got you. Yeah, I can see that. Morning to you. Thank you. Do any colleagues have any notice of other of their colleagues who are not attending? If not, thank you. With that one note to the apologies, we can move on to the minutes. Item 13, the minutes of the last meeting. Can I first ask for colleagues to identify any factual corrections that they may have seen as they've been through reviewing the document? I won't go through every page. I can't see any hands up. Then at the most suitable opportunity, Madeline, I'll sign those minutes as an accurate record of the meeting of the 13th of October. Could I ask, Madeline, if you could note at the end of the minutes, I'm not sure whether it's a Wokingham policy or not, but a table of the matters arising from those minutes, which I'll approve as I read through them and recommend them. But that way, I think we've then got a record of those items that we will need to follow up in the subsequent meeting, as opposed to what I will do now, which is go through these minutes, looking for those items and remembering what they were and then working with them. It also gives, I know the colleagues in finance, Lynn and Catherine, write a matters arising update, but that's very much a finance matters arising update rather than a generic matters arising update. So if we could note that at the back of the minutes each time, we'll have a small table saying, here are the matters arising that will be brought up at the next meeting.
No problem.
Thank you very much. So moving on then from the minutes as a factual record, the next item on the agenda is declarations of interest before we do matters arising. So can I ask if anybody has any declarations of interest that they have not previously declared? Again, I can see no hands, so if we could make a note that there are no further declarations of interest, please. And if we could move on to item 15, which is matters arising from the agenda. Catherine and Lynn have kindly provided us with a page 17, which suggests that there were no finance matters arising from the agenda. Thank you for that. My review of the document where there were items that did need to be followed up. Item 2 on page 11, school forums would receive an update on the additional funding allocated to Foundry College at the December meeting. I can't see a specific update on that, although I have noticed there's a number in our budget monitoring report. So please, if Lynn, Catherine, during your piece, if you could please bring that up under the high needs block
That's fine to be,
update. Thank you. I note also in the minutes, and the significance of this may become apparent later, whilst they are accurate on page 13, the very last sentence, which says, upon being put to the vote, schools forums decided not to support the 0.5% transfer from the schools block to the high needs block. That is accurate. I think it would be useful to minute that, and Heather, Lynn, Catherine, you may be able to agree. I believe the vote was 8-5 for that particular item. The significance of recording the vote in the minutes may become apparent as we get on further through the agenda. So Madeline, please, if you could make that note as a matter arising based upon the minutes, that we should document in our minutes the number of people that voted rather than just make a comment that there was a vote and it was carried. It may prove helpful in the future. And lastly, on page 15, and again, I'm looking for colleagues, Carol had asked that, particularly probably you, Lynn, came back to brief us on the new funding formula calculation, which at first glance looked to favour academies as opposed to maintained schools. Is that something that you are able to cover?
It's not something I can update on today, Chair, but it is something that we're keeping actively looking at, yeah, in terms of the wider growth fund discussion.
Carol? Good morning to you, Carol. You'd identified that you'd seen something, and I think, Lynn, we'd asked if you could have a look, please, at what that was.
Yeah, it was a growth fund stroke falling roles thing in the consultation that was only offering particularly the falling roles bit, to good and outstanding academies, not maintained schools. But that was in the consultation.
Apologies, Chair. I will pick that up immediately.
Lovely. Thank you, Lynn. Thanks. So again, can I ask, and I'm looking at my list of names and hands, I'm hoping to see any hands go up. If you have any further matters arising from those minutes, please could you indicate so now? Scrolling down, I can't see any little waving yellow hands. So, Madeline, if we can move on, please, from matters arising to the first significant item that we've got. Heather, if I can hand over to you, please, to talk through the item 16, the education partnership paper.
Thank you, Chair. The paper that's been sent through explains the rationale and the purpose of the intention of establishing an education partnership. Most importantly, I think this proposal reflects the voices of school leaders very strongly. I have seen a report of the work that Paul Brennan did before COVID, working with school leaders and the issues that were raised then. But I've also, I'm obviously relatively new to Wokingham. I have been involved in the recent conversations with school leaders, and those conversations are listed in the report. It's clear from what I've heard in those meetings that the big issues being highlighted as in need of more co-production and collective strategic direction, that some of those issues wouldn't be such big issues if we'd got that right at the very beginning of processes. I've also heard head teachers and saying that the journey that Schools Forum has been on has been a really positive journey, which has strengthened partnership working, but the scale of the big strategic issues is more than should be taken on by Schools Forum, because Schools Forum has a specific remit related to finance. And so some things have crept into the business of Schools Forum to try and resolve that actually should be better dealt with in a purposeful strategic arrangement. The terms of reference have been co-produced with school leaders, those who were in the recent conversations. They're still up for comment. The numbers about how many representatives from each sort of grouping is still up for debate and will probably be rehearsed again when the education partnership first meets. So they're not set in stone. The most sensitive issue, I think, that's come through from feedback on the report is that the membership is based on the premise of election nomination from Wokingham's strategic groups of head teachers and schools forum. The inclusion of executive heads from MATs is accepted as necessary, but we need to get our heads around how their representation takes place, because we would want everybody to be formally in an elected position to be there, and we haven't resolved that yet. So that would be an item for the core membership when established to consider and find a solution to. I think I can open that up to comment now, Paul.
Please, yeah. And I think Heather would welcome some comments from colleagues. I think a number of you have been involved in co-producing this document. So. I can't see anybody coming on. Perhaps I wanted to add. I've not seen this prior to it coming out. Heather, makes a huge amount of sense. Great to see Graham driving, or Graham and Rebecca driving this initiative through to bring the leadership across the borough into a group that can talk about the future. Where do you see strategy being given? I noted that the terms were very much to contribute and to review and to implement, as opposed to develop. How do you see the strategic vision being developed and the contribution, let's say, of this particular group to that vision, as opposed to, it doesn't seem to be here that they are writing that vision. They are very much listening, considering, and ultimately implementing.
Well, the group will have the remit to commission work to be done. So it will have the remit to set the steer on the content, but particularly, I think what's not happened in the past necessarily as well as it should is having everybody, a representative group around the table, to firstly understand why you might need a strategy in the first place. What is it? What is the problem? And a shared understanding of the problem, and then input into everybody's thinking coming to the table around that. Because I think what we do sometimes have, if we set someone off, come up with a strategy, they come up with it from their own perspective, then they share it with people, you know, sort of get the right perspectives around the table in the first place. But also I do think there's something important about, and how are we going to go about this? Understanding it from the school's perspective, being able to say, well, who needs to know about this? Whose perspective needs to come to the table on this? What's the data we need to have a perspective on this in the first place? And how should we go about moving in the direction we need to go? And doing that together. So I do see it as influencing the development of strategy and the content of that strategy, but it's a fine line. It depends how the group operates. But obviously we're not it's still got to be together, working together. But the issues, as I see it, is head teachers don't always feel they understand the data that informs the problem. The communications are such that not everybody has the same understanding of that, and what processes we're going through to find the solutions. I think that's more what the group would want to have an influence on and focus on.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or issues? Heather, can I ask how do you see? Oh, sorry, Ben. So you get a hand up. Apologies.
Thank you, Paul. I think that's great. So I missed part of this. So I'm sorry if I'm repeating a question that's asked. It was really, I think it's the phrase "to take decisions,"
yes,
and the scope of what setting a direction. So take a decision on setting direction. Is there, where might the consultation into the appropriateness of that be that feeds into that decision making?
I think that's for the group to determine what it feels is appropriate given what it is it's dealing with at the time. I mean, obviously local authorities in some strategies, they have statutory responsibilities for consultation. But I think what we're focusing on more is making sure that we get the school leaders' perspective collectively. And people all feel they may not be round the table, but everybody knows what's going on and everybody knows what the conversations are that are being had and what the purpose is of something and what the rationale is for it and how they can contribute to it. So it's about trying to create something where everybody feels they're on the same page. Decisions, there are so many different kinds of decisions, aren't there? But a decision in this context constitutes a steer and an expectation. Yeah. Thank you.
It's almost because decision has finality associated with it.
Yes.
Thanks, Ben. Other follow-up questions? Heather, other than thanking you and your colleagues for pulling this starting point report together, how would you like to take it forward? I note that on the front page it says School Forum is asked to note the report, which is thank you. But I note also somewhere in the report, page 25, it says you're effectively looking. If I can read it to you, the sentence says formal proposal considered by School Forum on 8th of December. How would you like that to be shaped or phrased or minuted? What's the?
I would like some. I don't know how. I'd like support to be visible for it, but particularly through the nomination of representatives to be on the group, because in the terms of reference, I thought the purpose, what I was asking for was for you to note and the invitation to nominate members of the core body. So I would like Schools Forum to express its support and commitment to the development of an education partnership and to undertake, not in this meeting obviously, but to undertake to identify its representation in such a group. I'm seeking to pull an initial group together to set the ball rolling straight after Christmas, in the new term.
Okay. So the two, I think you summarised that well. I'm hoping Madeline, or we've got it on video, but I'm hoping we've got that down. So you're looking for a better word, a vote of support. So a comment from School Forum that we support the initiative and the way it's been presented here. And a secondary part of that, perhaps not today, but at some stage in the near future, that School Forum will, across its group, I note on page 26, it suggests School Forum has 3 representatives, which might include early years. Do I gather that you would like this group at some stage to nominate 3 colleagues who would join your group, of which one of whom should be an early years rep?
That would be helpful.
Okay.
And I think in liaison with the chairs of the primary and secondary federations, because they will also be nominating members who may be on Schools Forum already.
Yes. So were we to have a specific agenda item at the January meeting that we have, would that have given the primary and secondary heads an opportunity to nominate their, in total, 7 reps, so that we didn't duplicate those same reps when we were looking for 3 from School Forum?
Yes, it would, although I'd quite like to move more quickly with it. I mean, what I can do, if given the go-ahead, is I can now ask for those nominations from the primary and secondary heads associations, and then I can get back to you as chair and tell you who they are, and then open it up for you to be able to identify the additional representation from Schools Forum. If I go for an initial meeting sort of around the second week of term, till the middle of January, to give people time to, because we're going to have a staggered start, I think, as well, aren't we, back at school in the new year with COVID. So maybe the middle of January, and then that would give time. When is your next meeting, Paul?
I think it's Madeline, you might have it in front of you. The 12th. So that would work for you. Yes,
that would work great.
Okay, then Madeline, can I ask you to add to the agenda for the forward agenda for the meeting of the 12th, an item that from within the School Forum group, we will nominate we'll agree and nominate 3 representatives to sit on the Education Partnership. Heather, if by then, or between us, we would know who the primary and secondaries were, and we wouldn't therefore get any duplication.
Yeah, that would be great.
Thank you. And then, colleagues, I would like to put to the vote so that we can give Heather, if necessary, the support she wants if we believe that appropriate. Has anybody got any comments they'd like to make before I ask you to indicate your support or not for the document that's been tabled? Again, I'm looking down the list. I don't see any hands up, which I'm hoping is a really good sign, Heather. Then could I ask colleagues, please, to formally indicate their the note and support of this initiative to build an education federation for the borough. Immediately, I'm seeing loads of hands go up. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have no doubt that is unanimous. I don't think we need to count the number of votes, but there I can see at least 14 of our, I think we've got about 18 or 19 on the call, plus one. So at least 14 of that vote. So it's unanimously vote of support for the document and this first step in this initiative. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Chair.
Lovely. Thanks. There are no further comments on item 16, which was the Education Partnership. Can we move into the numbers part? Item 17, revenue monitoring. Catherine, yours, or have you pushed Lynn into the front line? No? Catherine, you're standing up. Well done. Okay, thanks, Catherine.
Morning, everyone. Right, let me share my screen. Hopefully you can see that. So the updated forecast, we've moved from 3.1 in your deficit to 2.9. That movement is mainly to do with the schools block. We've seen a decrease against the growth fund that we had available for this year. And the high needs block, we've got just a small movement of 65,000, but that's actually offset by the 400,000 for the foundry that is not going to get drawn down this year. So with our ongoing discussions with the foundry, we know that there's still a financial challenge there, but we're still discussing it. It wasn't as bad as we thought it was going to be at the beginning of this year, so they've not had to draw down on the 400,000 that we put in the high needs block for that. Lynn and I are meeting with the foundry on Friday to go through all their finances for next financial year. The increases that offset the 400 were to do with still all new academic year movements. So there's an increase in working on mainstream schools funding for HCPs, FE colleges and independent non-maintained special schools. Contingencies, again, schools block, the de-delegated contingency, there's still been no calls on that. For the early years provider reserve fund, we have had right late in November the formal notification of the adjustment for last financial year, and there's actually a clawback this from last year of 90,000, and we're still working through the numbers of that to work out why that happened, what's going on with that, and we're going to set up a meeting with the early years task and finish group to discuss this, and also then to look at what the rates are going to be for next financial year. So we'll be setting up those meetings, hopefully we'll get one in before Christmas, but they'll definitely be next year once we get the final settlement for next financial year through just before Christmas. growth fund, there's been a reduction in forecast. Darren, Piers and I met to go through all the numbers. We've updated all the contingencies. There's still discussions on some primary and secondary classes that might be needed from January. So we've reduced the forecast on those to 3 months rather than before it was like 7 months. We're still holding a bit of contingency for that because there are still discussions ongoing with that. That amount's quite important for the growth fund because that means whatever's left over from this year can carry forward to next year. So there'll be less that we'll need to retain from the schools block to cover growth fund for next year. Part of our reporting, let me scroll down to the report. Right. We did a forward-looking plan to see what we needed this year and what we needed for next year, and we split out the secondary and primary contingencies. For next year, we're going to need 1.8 million, but if we carry forward the 260,000, we're not going to need all of that. We're getting 1.6 million estimated in for next year in our income for schools block, which covers the growth factors. So we won't need all of that if we've got 260 odd to carry forward from this year. Anything that we don't use can get carried forward to the following year. So what I've done the modelling further on in the agenda for the draft schools block is I've used 1.5 million. So we need to retain that for next year's funding. So I've included that in the modelling.
Shall we postpone the conversation?
Sorry, I'm
the work you've done on that for the budget, and let's focus on revenue monitoring as we are at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. But thank you for the background to how the growth fund has been calculated and where we will see it a bit later. If you could scroll back up in your screen, please.
Yes. Where would you like?
More occasions, is there anything else, or were you comfortable that you're happy to open up to some questions?
Yeah.
Okay, then colleagues, looking at the revenue monitoring report, are there questions? And if I can, Ian. Surprise.
Hi, Catherine. So are we looking at January then for the reserves to be finally settled and returned?
Yeah, sorry, and because of that clawback, it's not looking likely there'll be anything to give out like we normally do most years. So we've not had any additional funds through, so we need to factor that into the rates that we're going to look at for next year.
Are you concerned about this clawback? Because what with a fixed funding model, it seems strange that there's a clawback when.
Yeah, that's why we're still working through the numbers now, because there's so much data to go through for everything. So we're still working it through, but yes, we are listening to it. Yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Thank you,
Catherine. What is the reserve? Because I'm aware that the prudent management that you've brought to early years block, you retain a small reserve and don't distribute everything. How much is that reserve at the moment?
Well, that's what we're working through, but it looks like there isn't. Everything's been used last year, so that's what the problem is. That we've used all of our income was used, and then they're taking a clawback off of us as well. So that's what we're working through now to work out why that happened.
Leaving aside the why for the moment, the implications of having an overspend in this year, effectively, I mean, that's the outcome of where we are. Is that going to impact the likely allocation of funding to early years in 22-23? i.e., are we required to recoup that from the funding that may come in next year?
Lynn, you've got your hand up.
Yeah. Here's
Sorry,
the ball.
Just to add in there, so I think the particular challenge we've got this year is that 90,000 actually refers to last financial year. So we're almost trying to look at financial planning over 3 financial years at the same time, consider the impact of that clawback for last year that we've been told about months later than we would normally be, look at what that means in terms of the position for the current year, and then also, as you've rightly said, Chair, need to consider what that then looks like in terms of how we set and recommend funding levels for the following financial year. So we're in a very unique set of circumstances. Catherine, can you just remind me obviously we talk about that 90,000, that's about last year's reserve funds, but can you remind me what we were holding for this financial year?
Oh,
In terms of when we set the budget for this year and we top slice, we'll confirm that, because that's the part that we need to work through and Ian sit down and look at you about, you know, if you remember the task and finish group. So
it was circa 200,000, wasn't it?
When we looked at what we were doing.
around.
So we need to, it's that really tricky balance that we've got of almost trying to look at 3 financial years at the one time and work that through. So it's not an ideal position. That clawback is not something that we are used to in Wokingham and something that we wouldn't normally expect. So it definitely brings challenges. But I think until we get through all the detail of that and look at what's now been happening this financial year, it's really difficult to say what the outcome and what the implications will be.
And I'm guessing that the DSG early years allocation is going to be late again this year.
Yeah, they hopefully tell us just before Christmas. So fingers crossed, just before we break up for Christmas, they'll let us know.
19th of December last year.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas, everyone. Yes, that's generally how it works. So yeah.
All right. So is a meeting feasible before Christmas? Is it actually worth it?
Probably not, to be honest. No. So I'll get something in the diary for the beginning of next term.
Okay.
Please. So if we could get a diary meeting in for Ian, and Ian, that there were 2 or 3 of you, weren't there? Forgive me.
Yeah, there was Kerry.
Kerry was all I remember.
And I think I had one other colleague, Karen, who deputises sometimes.
Then please, if we could ensure that's in the diary. I'd like to just clarify my mind. So we are unclear what the reserve in this year was, although Ian has a feeling it might have been, let's say, in the 200,000 range. We're aware that we've got a drawback on our funds of 94,000. So were it to have been 200,000, it now falls to 100,000 plus or minus a penny or two. Yes.
Yes, the 90,000 relates to previous financial year.
Regardless which year it relates to, the fact is we've got 200,000 in reserve, and we're being asked to pay back 90,000. So we've got 100,000 in reserve. We've then got a new figure coming up around Christmas time. That new figure plus the 100,000 divided by all the wonderful calculations you've got will give Ian and the early years group their outcome figure for 22-23.
Yes, but I suppose the extra part of that will be that the equivalent of, for this financial year, of the 90,000 for last year, we'll need to relook at what we think, whether we think in terms of actual hours delivered over the year, whether we think that the balance of the reserve we made in year, and look at whether we think that's sufficient with the learning of how they've handled last financial year. So you're absolutely right, Chair, but that's just the added complexity that we'll need to factor in and look as a group to make sure that's right.
Thank you. Ian, any further questions on the early years piece? Or
no,
anybody?
I feel sorry for the ladies.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. It's a collective challenge, however, and I think, Catherine will obviously get the date set up for early in the new term, but if we come across any information or anything that we think is useful to share with you, even if we don't meet prior to Christmas, we'll obviously make sure, Ian, that you've got sight of that.
I mean, money coming back would be useful. I mean, we are under some extreme pressures at the moment with COVID really starting to affect some of the settings in Wokingham. So any extra funds is always welcome.
Thank you, Ian. And Catherine, Lynn, to hear those words from Ian, with all due respect, Ian, when you go back 3 years when we had no transparency, no understanding, that's great. So again, thank you. Looking through the other items, do I have other questions from colleagues? I think, sorry, Lynn, this more relates to the transparency you've been giving us. I note that your profiling of current high needs block demand has enabled you to effectively release or recognise that the shift in profile of young people and the funding requirements by different segments actually now looks much better. And I think 120 grand has effectively been released from what you thought you would have for OOBs, I think it was.
So I think that's, you know, what, as you said, that the more information we've got, all the work that's been done, and again, this comes into the next item on the agenda around the high needs block. Yeah. We've significantly more data. There is still more work to do. There is no doubt about that. It's a continual process of improvement, but we have far more scrutiny between SEND and finance, that joint information that we're able to put in place to be able to inform hopefully better quality of information that comes back to you as a group. If I can just refer back to the Foundry point as well, because I know Catherine did refer to that. So just to reiterate, Forum will remember that when we set out the high needs block budget, we knew that there were, and working collectively with Forum, with Foundry rather, the scale of the challenge that they were potentially facing for this financial year. And that's why we earmarked that 400,000 as an additional line within the budget. There is no doubt that absolutely challenges for Foundry are still there. There's a significant amount of work in the review process that's coming to a conclusion, and we'll feed back that at a later date in terms of setting the budget for next year. However, the latest forecast information for Foundry, while still challenging for them, and I want to keep reiterating that, although we've taken the 400 out the forecast, there is absolutely no doubt that they still have a financial challenge. However, the current forecast for this year, it eats into the reserves they're holding, but still leaves with what, as a local authority, we would class as a sensible level of reserves at the end of the financial year. So while it's come out the forecast, I just want to reiterate that point. It does not mean that Foundry don't have a financial challenge and that there's not a significant amount of work going on behind the scenes to look at how we address that for future years.
Thank you. Thank you. It just seems an open sore, that independent and non-maintained. So you've identified the 400,000 put aside for Foundry was an appropriate reserve given the unknown position you had. You've now been able to release that back, so it's not going to be a spend. Your reprofiling has enabled you to release back 120 grand on the spend by category in OOBs, but yet our independent and non-maintained number has eaten 75-80% of that up because it's overspent by 390.
And again, coming in, that just refers to the continued increase in the number of EHCPs. And I think when Dan comes on to look at the presentation around the high needs block about what the measures that we're looking at that are longer term that help us shift that, but there is no doubt that leaves us with an immediate challenge in terms of local provision, the complexity, the sheer number of young children and young people with SEND in Wokingham who need support has led to that position that there is still an increasing number in independent and non-maintained.
Okay, thank you. Ginny, sorry, I missed your hand up a little earlier.
Hello. So I've got about 15 questions, but I'll do it for 2. My first one on page 38, perhaps it's more of note than question, regarding resource spaces. I'm sure Forum will be well aware, and we look back on paperwork, that the consultation for resource bases has been going on for circa 4.5 years. And the last response of resource bases was June 2021. And here we are in December 2021 with no clarity still for schools about what that looks like. This seems to be an unacceptable strain on school finances and a risk of financial planning that is being placed upon settings. And I just want that noted so that we might hope to resolve that, because after 4.5 years, you'd like to think it's something you can quite achieve. The second one is really a question. On page 39, I'm curious, because I don't recognise these numbers. On actually the mainstream post 16, can somebody explain to me the where those numbers are derived from? I've never in the whole of my Forum time seen those numbers.
We get that top sliced from us, and it's really old and historic numbers. They've not been changed for a number of years, but that's the number that the DfE recognise as those academy schools having in post 16 high needs places.
So yeah, we first, when we had what seems like in one way 2 minutes ago, and in other ways a lifetime ago, the extraordinary meeting a year ago just now, last December, when we all came together for the extraordinary meeting of the high needs block, Jenny, that was the first time in terms of unpicking everything for that we'd look to start to flag the fact that there was effectively, as part of the academy recoupment that the DFE applied to our high needs block, is based on this fact that we effectively are commissioning these 27 post-16 places in these schools, and therefore that's recouped from the high needs block in Wokingham. We have referred to it as part of the overall work plan in terms of, and the more information we've got in terms of understanding it is a historic basis. Is it still fit for purpose? Is it something we need to review? And yeah, it's very much in the plan about how we look at that, because it's not an insignificant funding that is attributed to those schools without us thinking, how does that complement the strategy and all the other work we're doing as part of the high needs block?
Well, thank you. I think I understand it. I don't think I do actually.
No.
But if it's in place, it's very interesting to see those numbers. Thank you very much.
Happy to pick up outside, Jenny. If there's something particularly around that number, we can pick up outside. Happy to do that.
Yeah, that's what the 162,000 row is on there. That's gets taken off of us and given out to those academy schools and their funding.
How did those numbers, historical or not, how did they arrive? What are they based on?
That's a very good question. It must have been from a census way back when of high needs pupils in post-16, I think.
Do we tell DFE, ESFA this is the number, or does it just sit there and it's been there forever? Paul, I'll come to you in a second.
So we have the opportunity, yeah, we have the opportunity to update it. I think the work hasn't been done up to this point to establish what we would change it to, and that's exactly what we need to look at now, and that's part of the plan, Paul, in terms of understanding what post-16 places are out there. How does that look like? How does it fit into the overall strategy, so that we can look to amend those numbers if that's appropriate to do that.
If it results in greater income, I can give you some really good numbers right now. They put a 0 on every one of them. So, okay. Paul, sorry, you've got a hand up.
Yeah, just from a post-16 point of view, certainly those numbers are new to me in terms of where they come from. I know that's been mentioned already. Obviously, census data come in, but we've never been asked for any further data, is my understanding, and neither have any of the heads with sixth form provision in the borough, is my understanding. So my view is it definitely needs reviewed as soon as possible, really, just to make sure it's accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
I'm looking. Shirley, you've got a comment?
Agreed with Paul. I've got 3 on there that's news to me. So again, I like Paul's suggestion of 0. That would be everybody. And then if we then take students, it could be commissioned directly, but it seems silly to be sending that much money back to the DFE. That's my understanding.
My understanding was it actually it's in your gag amount. You get that through yourselves, but maybe that's not right then.
I'm going to check.
Even more reason to put a 0 on the end of it. Darren.
Yeah, we would really Chair, just to say, yeah, we would really welcome that being Chair, because that is our understanding that that's what happens. And if that's not what's happening, then absolutely, that's a bigger question about where that's going. I think the appropriateness of where it's going just now is something we need to review. But if we can't even track where it's going, that puts a whole different context on it. So if that's not coming through an individual school gag, so yeah, we would really welcome some feedback on that.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'm sure we can get some feedback on that. Shirley, if you could feed yours back, Ginny, yours as well. Sarah? You got your hand up? Hi.
Hello. Yes, that is coming through on our gag. I've always wondered what that one student is, who that one student is, because it comes every year, and I think surely they must have left the school by now. So yes, it would be good to know.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other comments for Catherine or Lynn on revenue monitoring? It's my background, but I hate seeing expenditure first and then income. I just, there's a sort of intellectual piece about this that says this is our spend. Oh my God, where are we going to get the money from? Surely everything that we do is the other way around. This is the amount of money we've got, and this is how we are allocating it. So on each of these summary pages, to see expenditure first and then income as a sort of, damn, we've only got this much, it just feels so wrong in terms of the way we're trying to approach budgeting. This is the amount, we're trying to be responsible. This is the money we've got. This is how we spend it in year. This is what we might bring forward.
Yeah, we can change that.
Yeah.
The income
seems
doesn't change in the year, whereas the expenditure is the thing that changes. But yeah, we can.
Yeah.
The presentation.
It's a mindset. Okay. I would also suggest, Darren, sorry, you had your hand up. Forgive me, I asked. Darren?
Hello. I just say it does come through in your gag statement from this sixth form funding statement. I'm not sure whether this is the right agenda time to do this, but on page 40, the empty places in the resource basis. We asked this question a while ago. So we've got the forecast for September for primary and the actuals for September, the actuals for November. And there was some work was going to be done on looking at the number of places that were funded going forward for September. So one is there an update on that? And secondly, there doesn't seem to be the actuals or the place funding. Oh, so there is the place funding, but not the actuals for the secondary resource bases. I can't seem to see that in the documentation.
Okay, so yeah, we can certainly update that. Some of the secondaries the way they were because done on SLAs is for finance we don't always hold that information down, but we can absolutely look to ensure that that's added in and put made clearer for future reports, definitely.
And any update on place funding?
Is that covered off in the finance block or?
Yeah, I don't know whether Dan, whether that's something you can pick up when we cover onto the.
Because there's a situation where.
Sorry,
Daniel, you're probably answering the question there.
Yeah, it's picked up in the presentation on where we are with that, and then what we're going to move on to next with the resource bases. So it picks up on that.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. Paul, you've got your hand. Ginny, you were next up in line.
Yeah, just to say, I think the numbers for resource bases are actual in the number for September. The Oaks is at 20 because it's winding down. So though it had the capacity for 25, it's not having in year 7. Instead, they're at Maiden Early, and that's where that 5 is. So the resource base is equal and full.
Thank you, Jenny. Paul?
That's pretty much what I was going to say, because there's the switch to the resource hub to ours. So thanks, Jenny, you beat me to it.
Great, thank you. I note also on page 40, we show Chiltern Way with what I believe are the SLA numbers. I think it would be very helpful to understand what the actual numbers were, because actual isn't. I think you can't put November actual when it's actually an SLA. I think that's not helpful. I think you should put the SLA number and then as a separate line the actual.
Okay.
And if I then relate that number back to the main budget, am I looking at a funding of about £1.6 million for those SLA'd 48 places, which may in fact be some number less than 48 in actual terms? Does that sound about right?
Yeah, because there's other local authorities. Obviously, the top up funding that we are paying are for Wokingham pupils, and there's obviously pupils within the resource base. So we can look to split out that table in the same way we've done for the other resource bases about how many Wokingham and other local authority as well, which will help that hopefully.
So I come back. The quality of the reporting, Lynn and Catherine, is brilliant. You're almost getting to the point that the little trick I used to use in years gone by, send them so much they can never spot what's in there. But no, it really is very, it's excellent being able to see this. So thank you very much for enhancing that. Interesting that we spend, was it something like 6.5 million on Addington for 255 places and 1.5 on Chiltern Way for less than 50. I appreciate it's not as easy as a simple calculation. It sounds like Addington's underfunded relative to Chiltern Way. Any further questions? I've got Sarah. Sarah, your hand's up.
Yes, I just thought it might be useful to have the band values for the resource bases, because we've got the band values for Addington. There's no band values for Chiltern Way or the resource bases, and I think from a financial point of view, it'd be good to see those.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you. If there are there any further questions on revenue monitoring to Catherine and Lynn? I'm assuming we're going to use the growth fund conversation as part of the budget conversation, even though I appreciate it's Appendix D on the revenue monitoring report. Okay, then could we move from revenue monitoring on to Dan, please, with the high needs block update. You're
Sorry, Paul. I'll just put my presentation up. I'll just share my screen.
Thank you.
There you go. So good morning, everyone. The Innovation and Improvement Programme has obviously increased its reach, I suppose, with regard to the financial implications. So this presentation really covers the work that's being done to bring us back to a break-even position regarding income and the high needs block around 2025 and 2026, but it also presents and links to the improved performance and outcomes. So that's just an overview of that, because it has slightly changed. It does seem to become more financially motivated now, which I suppose when you start to get things in order, you can then make sense of them, which I think Lynn touched on. So the presentation is going to take 3 phases. The first one is just to outline where we are at the moment with the EHCP implications if we don't act. The second phase is the areas of work, which is around managing the demand, increasing provision, and increasing inclusivity. And then the third phase is if we can pull those all together, where the EHCP implications look in terms of growth, provision, and ultimately cost. So just to give you a view of where we are at the moment, we've projected that the main areas that cost us the most money are SEMH, ASD, SLD, and SLCN. And as you can see, the projections there are quite stark in terms of what we're looking at. So just for ease for the group, in terms of our projections, at the moment for SEMH, we have 225 EHCPs, for ASD 488, and then as you go through SLD and SLCN, 90 and 115, the rest of the EHCPs only come to 352. You can see as we've projected those forward, if we do nothing at the moment and we just carry on in terms of the process that we do at the moment, we're going to hit quite substantial numbers, 498, 883, which do have quite a large effect on the financial position. To make that really simple, we are looking at around 2,300 EHCPs come 2025 is what we think we're going to be coping with. Obviously, because of Wokingham size, it doesn't look a great rise, but in terms of percentage, and if you compare it across the country, it sits in line with what's happening there, but it does raise some concerns. So I just wanted to highlight, if we do nothing at the moment, that's the projections that we've developed. So in terms of those costs, at the moment, we're looking at a total cost of 30 million in 2022 for EHCPs, with a projected funding of 24 million. As we go through to 23, we're looking at 37 with 26 and 46 with 28, and we get to 25 with an expenditure with all those EHCPs of around 57 million, with an income of 30 million, which would take us to an in-year deficit of 11 million and a cumulative deficit, which obviously we wouldn't be able to manage, of 45 million. So they're the numbers we're looking at in terms of the cost and the actual implications of where we are. So that was to just give you a view, with all the work done with Lynn and with commissioning and with SEND, projections and costs, to give you a view of that. So in terms of looking at that, and the second phase of the presentation has been split into 3 work streams. So panel decisions and paperwork processes are in place. They have been now since April and May, and that seems to be working well. We've had a huge uptake from people from all areas of settings supporting panel, which has given us a real indication of where we are and what those decisions are made, and that's been fantastic. Complex case forum, which is really the forum where we make decisions on the out of borough children and those placements that have to go through a process to be signed off, has now been in place for the last 4 decisions, and that's been working very well. It's not saving us any money, but what it's doing is giving us that clear audit trail of why we've got there. So just to give you a view, for the last 4 cases that have gone through complex case forum, which have cost us all in excess of 60,000 each, we've had 15 to 20 consults for all of those cases, and we've just got a final place. So that's the sort of issues we have. It's not only that out of borough is expensive, it's also there are no places out of borough as well. So just to raise that view. The structure of SEND has now been defined. We've obviously got an assessment team and an annual review team. We have permanent members of staff joining us. We've got an ATM. We've just had a senior officer join us. The processes within that team are very clear, and the actual service delivery in terms of its administrative responsibilities are clear as well, through a lot of work done with our colleagues. At the moment, lap delivery, which obviously Heather's involved in, is looking at what the delivery of laps should be and how that supports our issue around EHCPs. That is literally quite new though. And obviously the focus of consistency from SEND is the recruitment of perm staff, which I've touched on, and we are very confident that come the middle of the summer next year, we'll have a 75% permanent SEND team. What we've been able to do as well, just to rest any fears, is that the interim staff that have been with us probably now for 9 months will still be with us for the next 6 months as we recruit permanent staff to allow for a handover, so we don't get a hard start and stop and have the issues that we had last year. The local offer, Woking and Borough Council have a whole strategic review of the local directory, which obviously involves the local offer. We're currently in discussions about whether that's the best way to reshape and rejig the local offer, because one of the issues that picked up on our meetings with heads and Senkos is actually the ability to go and get support and know where to look for support from not just schools but also families, which if they can't get that support and they don't know where it is and they don't know how to get it, obviously the default will be to request an assessment, which then impacts the HCP growth. So we're looking at the local offer at the moment in what can be done. And then the last bit is the systems around SEND transport. Obviously there's been a huge amount of complaints I'm very aware of. We've recommissioned the whole SEND transport service for this year. We've just had a full review of that and we've put in place the processes to move that forward. That has saved money. That doesn't directly affect the high needs block, but it's to give you a view of the systems in-house that have been changed. So that's the straightforward work, if I'm being totally honest, in terms of getting the systems and the processes in place and staffing. Obviously, Jenny and myself have been out, I think we've done 10 visits now with heads and Senkos around the ordinary available, and we're putting together work packs for that as we move forward. One of the big key differences, which I think is really important, is we've had a number of meetings with health. My view is that the ordinary available offer from health is insufficient at the moment to support Wokingham with what they need, and actually with the strain on the health services around OTs and SALT and also our own EP service, it's not clear to me, and from speaking to Senkos, head teachers and parents, it's not crystal clear what access is available under an EHCP. And actually when you dig and drill down their ordinary available offer, some of what they are saying is ordinary available is only on offer if you have an EHCP, which is counterintuitive, which means again, default would be, if I was a parent or a Senko or a school, I would say, well, let's run the assessment and let's see what happens. So we're working with health to make that more robust and really clear on what is on offer. And if it isn't on offer, what the funding or what needs to be changed from a health directive to get through. We're also looking at the element 2 link, of which 8.8 million obviously goes out to schools. And the big question for myself is that insufficient for Wokingham? So we've obviously met with the SFA and the DFE and had some discussions, and I've met with them outside of meetings. We are one of the worst funded authorities with regards to element 2, which would highlight to me, although we're doing the work with heads and Senkos at the moment to get a real robust answer on that, I would say that one of our issues is with the DFE, we aren't funded correctly, which would then intimate if you aren't funded correctly at the element 2 level, again, it pushes you through to do an EHCP assessment to get the funding that you feel's adequate, if that makes sense. So we're just working through that at the moment. We will have that finished by March. And then we're going to work with our colleagues in the DFE on what we find from that and how that moves forward. And we've already had quite a lot of input from heads and Senkos as we've started that. We've also got some discussions which link to the LAP service around what outreach is needed and looking to support that. We had a start, especially with Addington through the inclusion group, which fell on its face when I first started because of funding, but now, which I'll move on to in a minute, around provision development, that's definitely on the table to be funded appropriately, because it is a direct link to the costs that we're facing if we haven't got a fully serviced outreach service. With the Senkos and with PFA and training, there's a huge amount going on through Jenny and Linda through the IOP. They're chairing all the Year 9 annual reviews at the moment, or partially chairing, and there's lots of feedback and training going on that. With our PFA training, Preparing for Adulthood, which links to the transitions group, we are making sure that we're starting to identify those clear pathways so that we can strategically look at what the rising costs may be, and actually if we can put early intervention in, if that's going to work long term. So that's the collaboration that's going on, and I have to say, from health and from schools and parents and Senkos, the input so far has been amazing, which is probably where we're getting to now in terms of understanding the numbers and what can and can't happen. So from all of that work, I presented to members, Chief Exec, Section 151, DCS, Heather, some other people, the work we've done with finance, and said that at the end of the day, in terms of the financial implications of independent out-of-borough placements, we need to look to build provision within Wokingham. So we've made an initial approach with Addington, just to, if they would be interested, and request to add 2 additional sites to increase capacity and reach. I'm working with estates, highways, place planning, etc., to look at how that would look and what the scope of that project would be. I'm also looking at a request for 2 additional sites for special schools with a focus on SEMH and behaviour, because it's obviously an issue and it's something we don't have in place. And then, as I mentioned, the outreach, clarity and investment with regards to Addington and Foundry as we move forward. So touching on sort of Ginny's comment, the resource-based review, the SLA, the amendments, it's my fault that it's dragged on this year, just simply with the other work, so apologies. Richard Tipping and Jenny have obviously been in and visited all but one of the resource bases. We have all the financial information. We have Richard's full review, which Jenny and myself are just unpicking at the moment. We are, as you may or may not be aware, Richard's left us, so we are recruiting someone else to join to finish off that piece of work. We're hoping to interview next week, and they will support us with coming out with regards to the SLAs and the amendments. As of next week, we'll be going back to the heads at the resource bases with our findings and next steps, what we think could or couldn't happen and what their view is on that in terms of increasing provision. We're also, in terms of provision and development, working with health around SIPIT, the CCG, and so on in terms of what they can provide for us, as I just commented on. So we're looking to increase the provision that health can provide. We've also, it's an odd word, but we're overfunding at the moment the EP service. There is a huge lack of EPs around the area, around the country, sorry. We have a number of interim and consultants working through that service, but it is still stretched, which again has an impact on what we can and can't deliver in terms of provision. But we are confident that with the strategy, we can at least retain our staff, and we are looking to sort of train our own, build our own through a process with Elaine. So hopefully that helps us with the provision development. So there's quite a lot there. Obviously, the 2 big factors are the fact that from the initial presentation, chief exec members and so on are very positive towards us building for, in effect, 4 special schools within the local area, albeit not 250 capacity, but certainly of a capacity that would help us with our high needs block and would remove the pressures of children going out to borough in terms of transport and the cost. Just to touch on the oak tree and the delay, and I'm sure there may be some questions afterwards. I'm working with the DfE at the moment because the discussions around that delay, we now have a provisional opening date of Easter 23. We will be looking to put children, hopefully, or work with the trust in September 23, which gives the DfE that little bit of leeway with the delay, because obviously with the delays, I personally have, well, if there's one delay, I then have no confidence they're going to get it done for the next time. So we've had that conversation and we're working with them on that. That will also impact the high needs block once we can get that moving, but that has negatively affected our high needs block because of the delays and because of what we're having to do with the children that we're going to go there. So that's just the 3 streams of work. There's the systems in-house, there's the inclusion and collaboration work, and then there's the increase in provision that we're working through. So just as a view, as I said earlier, if we do nothing, the HCPs will hit about 2,297. We think if we can increase the inclusion, work with our health colleagues, look at what's available at element 2 and look at that support network, we can reduce it down to 2039. It may not sound a huge decrease, but we are working with small numbers. And what I wanted to do, and I know when we were speaking with Lynn and Richard, is be really, is not inflate what we can and can't deliver. With regards to, if possible, and hopefully we can, building 4 sites, just removing all of those children that would go out of borough, possibly, what we've got is a total cost with all the mitigations that would hit 31 million in 2025 instead of 57 million. It still gives us an in-year deficit of 1.8. So it still means that in 2025, with all of the work I've just discussed, we still don't break even. We're still not working within the money that's coming in through the DFE. But what it shows is the impact of having those 4 new schools, the reduction by putting in place what should be there that's ordinarily available, which takes us to a break-even point, hopefully in 2026. It still gives us a cumulative deficit as well of 20 million when we get to 25 with all this in place. So some of the conversations that I just want to make the group aware that are going on are, and it links to the resource-based review and it links to our special schools as well, of adding an additional cost for those children that aren't from Wokingham that come in. So, for example, we have a number of schools where our children are placed out of borough, but in a maintained setting. We do pay an increased cost on that. So Wokingham doesn't do that at the moment. So in terms of, I suppose, a commercial opportunity to recoup money, that's what we've discussed. There are a few other commercial ventures that we've looked at to try and recoup that money, but at the moment that's in its preliminary stages. So just to give you an overview of where we are, I hope that's quite clear. I hope it gives you the stark contrast of where the 57 million when we presented to members kind of really sort of hit home on where we are and what we need to do. And I think that if we've got their backing, we can work with estates planning and so on, and then work with yourselves to move that forward. If there are any thoughts on the work we're doing, any support, any ideas, anything that people say, actually, have you thought of this or can we develop this, then we're more than interested. And through our meetings with heads, Senkos and etc., I'd be more than happy to pick up those calls. So that's just a brief presentation to give you an overview of all the work, also give you an overview of the financial implications. And as Lynn said, I think this is the first time we've had a robust understanding of those financial implications. They may not be positive, but I think it's the first time that we actually know where we are as a local authority in terms of the high needs block. So if there are any questions or anyone wants to raise anything, happy to pick up questions now.
Thank you, Dan. Open it up to colleagues to ask some questions. Not seeing any hands go up at the moment. Dan, love the quality of the graphics on the left-hand side. When we get those, they're wonderful. Thank you very much. A great piece of work, and thank you for sharing what are really, really scary numbers. But nevertheless, I can understand why, if you don't share them, the challenge of the problem is it's just not understood fully. I can see the immense amount of work you're doing in the areas that you can directly control. If you're going to build 4 schools, are we looking at 50-60 million pounds worth of, probably more, capital investment, that sort of order?
So where we are at the moment, Paul, is that we had the meeting. I've been given 10 weeks by the members to come back to them after working with our estates, planning, etc., to give me those numbers. My skill set's not building schools, so I'm relying on them to give me those numbers to look what it costs. Either way, I would say that it will far outweigh the possible implications of having a 57 million outlay in 2025. So at the moment, this is the most up-to-date version of what I've got at the moment, but I'll keep updating people as I have those conversations. We've had 2 meetings with everyone, with officers in terms of planning in place. I've got a huge amount of information to work through them. So we're just scoping out what the cost of 4 schools would look like. And just to be transparent, obviously the local policy, the local strategy for building schools at the moment doesn't incorporate special schools. There is nothing in the strategy. And when I met with Sarah, she said that she'd been banging the drum about that for quite a while. but you know that's not in place. So this is a change to that. So it's quite a bit of work just to get that moved around. But I think I'm pretty confident we will do that. But I don't know what the cost of that will look like in terms of capital investment, Paul.
But it's not 5 million and it's not 10 million.
No, it
may
won't
not be
no.
100. It's going to be in the tens of millions, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and what we're looking at is the scope of the schools and the size to not be huge. So we're not looking to have a 255 special school. We're looking for smaller schools. There's a few things around that with tribunals and square footage and so on, which I won't go into at the moment. But it's also about if we can spread it around the geographical area as well, which then impacts our transport costs as well. But yeah, there's lots of conversations on that, but I don't know what the cost is. But yeah, it's not. Hopefully, it's not as 100 million, but yeah, it's definitely not 5.
Lynn, you've got comments.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that obviously, you know, we do receive some high needs block capital funding. It is clearly nowhere in the region of what we might be looking for here, but certainly in terms of our next round of engagement with the ESFA in terms of the deficit management plan, the investment, you know, being able to demonstrate the impact that potentially additional capital investment would make in terms of us being able to balance revenue resources in the longer term. You know, once Dan's been able to pull together that work, it would very much feature back into the discussions with the ESFA about what opportunities there might be to seek for additional funding through that route as well.
Comments from other colleagues?
I think just a comment from me, Paul, in response to Ginny's comment on the resource bases. I think that, you know, it's really important to share, you know, 3 to 4 years is a ridiculous amount of time to not have an SLA in place or not understand what our resource bases need, etc. We will get to that point early in next year. We will be speaking with them, and obviously Ginny will be part of that conversation through Westcott and West End, and we will get that, we will get that done. So everyone will have the SLA, we'll know where we're going. We are looking as well from the information provided by Richard and Jenny to increase that provision at that level as well. But I suppose it's more of an apology that it's still delayed, and that's actually, you know, as I said, it's slightly on me because I haven't been able to sit down with Jenny and get that done. She has been asking me, it's just with the other work, but we will have that done first couple of months of next year.
And that most schools, maintained schools particularly, start to prepare their budgets. They're probably already well into that program. Not knowing what those SLAs are going to be is going to compromise any plans they've got that will start on the 1st of April and run through to the 31st of March. I
think the one thing that will happen with that is those SLAs over the next year to 2 years will be done in collaboration with the awareness of what the impact that's on the budget, and then we can move those forward strategically, so it gives everyone time to look at their budget as opposed to just landing it on their desks, if that makes sense. But I understand the pressures it creates.
Does that mean that the SLA values, for want of a better term, are not going to change in terms of the budget planning for 22-23?
Yeah, no, they won't change, no.
So if I can just spin that back out to colleagues that are sitting there preparing budgets and looking at programs for next year. Ginny?
Thank you for the apology. Actually, I do genuinely appreciate that because it's been hard actually. So wholly accepted. You know, there's lots and lots of clear strategy here, which I can only commend. It's also so helpful to understand that the income of the resource bases will not change out of the blue. And that has been my main anxiety, simply for the provision of children in there. So thank you for that too. So yeah, I'm more than intrigued with your approach here. I think it's a good one.
Thank you, Jenny. Other comments? Again, if I can sort of step back a little bit from it, Dan, you clearly have a really strong approach to the things that are within your control, or the things you can bring into your control. And I just got this nagging thing at the back of my mind. 1/3 of the total spend on the high needs block is going to independent and maintained schools. Getting on for £8 million out of a £24 million spend. Everything that you're doing doesn't really impact that. It impacts the other pieces that you are trying to control. That 8 million is effectively, it's like a gangrene in one leg. you're doing a great amount of work on your left leg to make sure that really works and is in excellent shape for the future. But your right leg, costing £8 million, that's going to grow very significantly. By the time you get to your 25-26 period, out of your £30 million, 15 million is going to be on independent maintained schools. It's certainly not going to be 8, because that's growing at over £1 million a year. It's going to be a massive number.
The work, there's no work that's being done through the IIP on that. The work that's being done on that is the conversations with other directors around, mainly around the southeast. Well, actually, for me, mainly around the Midlands and the North, because that's where I've worked, and just asking them if, you know, when you have an issue like we have nationally, where our independent and our borough are making a huge amount of money, and there is a massive want for those type of places. Surely, as the people that are supplying them, we can come together to have some sort of agreement. But that's just a conversation that was held at a commissioning and a finance meeting nationally as well, to say, surely if we all held firm and set some sort of regulatory cost for the independent and outer boroughs, then that will bring the cost down. But it's not really anything I suppose I can control too much, Paul. It's just being part of those conversations. I think that what we can do, though, is the information. If we can say, as Wokingham in 6 months' time, this is all the money we're spending out of element 2, this is what we're doing with it, this is all the money we're delivering here, this is what we're spending on it. We are literally as lean as we possibly can be. We can then look to push and have conversations with the DFE and speak to our members to raise it with local government, to say we can't do any more, and we're being bled dry, if you want to put it in that term, by our outer borough placements that are costing us in excess of 60,000-70,000. The problem we have is, as you know, is if we don't have placements in local provision, we have to provide them with placements, and that's where they go out. What I'm hoping is that we can reduce what needs to go out so it can stay in, which is where we'll see those costs. But the best thing to do, I think, one of the commercial attitudes I would have is that if we have outer borough, if we have children coming into Wokingham from Berkshire, Reading and so on, for our resource bases and for our special schools, we put a cost on that and we start to treat it in that way. Whether that's morally correct, I don't know, but I think that what that would do would make every local area build more local provision, which would push out the independent and non-maintained sector as strong as it is at the moment, if that makes sense. But that's just a conversation I've raised in a couple of meetings. That's nothing to do with the IIP as we're delivering it at the moment.
But at 30% of your budget now, and likely to be closer to 50% in 3 years' time, it seems to me that needs to be more than a conversation. It seems to be the highest point on the agenda. It's the one, it's the lowest hanging fruit, or whatever it's very poor language, but it's such a big number, such a big number.
It's something that will be raised with the DCS with Heather, obviously, through the DCS when they come in to have that conversation. We'd had that conversation initially with Carol. She'd spoken to her counterparts in Reading and West Berks. At that stage, I'm not sure where it had got to. Yeah, it's one of those, I suppose. I'll control what I can control at the moment, but I'll take on board what you've said, and it probably does need to be more. It probably could be put into the programme. It's just we did need to get the send. We needed to get send in order, or some sort of order. So it's just bit by bit. So
thank you. Colleagues, any other? Shirley?
Thanks, Dan. Very useful to see it all laid out as it is. Can I just check for clarity, when you looked at that deficit was makes us all sit back in our seats and go, oh dear, we need to do something quite quickly. Have you based that on funding out of borough, in borough, in school, so with the top of like 4,000, 7,000, that kind of thing, or have you based it on resource-based positions and places for the students?
But the deficit's based on everything. So we've taken what the independent and non-maintained costs us per placement, and then we've also done resource bases. We've also done the amount of top-ups we place within mainstream, as well as our outer borough mainstream as well. So it's taken into effect all of that. So obviously that's not me that's pulled that. I'm not clever enough to do that. That's through Lynn's hard work, to be fair, pulling everything in place from the facts we've got, if that makes sense, Shirley. So it's taken into account everything. So the savings aren't just independent, non-maintained, they're from working everything through, if that makes sense, because obviously we do spend quite a lot on top-ups with mainstream because we can't find places as well.
So if I look to go down to 2025 and we had those large numbers of EHCPs in place, Have you worked that based on a percentage? So the same percentage of students would go into mainstream, the same percentage would
Yes.
go into
Yeah. Sorry. Well, actually, I think there's a slight increase going out because we've got no provision as well. Obviously. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's what we've done. Sorry. Is that right, Lynn? Sorry, just jumping in.
Yeah. Just to say, there's a whole range, and I suppose there's a whole range of assumptions that sit underneath this because of the level of complexity. So, Shirley, yeah, absolutely, we've made some assumptions on where numbers increase, where that would pro rata increase based on current experience, or where we think actually capacity is reached. So, you know, a big factor is, you know, how far can you keep pushing that mainstream percentage, for example. The fact that Addington's already full, so there's no further increase on that. So there's a range of assumptions that sit underneath it, both for expenditure and income, I have to say, because we don't know what the settlement's going to be for income. We've made some assumptions based on what we know for the coming financial year and how the current funding formula works. But we are really keen that what we do is we keep testing those assumptions and we keep bringing you more information so that you're clear about the detail that sits behind that and how we keep refining those assumptions as we move through certainly the next 6 months.
All right, thanks, Lynn. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no more, Shirley, you got, no, it's okay, it's gone down again. Thank you. If there are no more comments at the moment, Dan, thank you. That's been a great update. Thank you very much. Super piece of work, and look for. I think we've got you on the agenda again for, I think it's the February meeting. I'm sorry we keep asking you back, but I think it's the March meeting, 16th of March. I think that's really just. It's to work with you and give you as much support and encouragement as we possibly can, and I thank you for all the hard work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Can we move on to agenda item number 19, please? I think, am I going over to Catherine or Lynn? Who's going to? Lucky you, Catherine. Excellent. Good. Right.
Okay, again, I'll share my screen. Okay, right. So we've had the provisional October census data through. So we've had an increase of about 750 pupils from last year. So we initially modelled on about 126 million income initially, and now that's gone up to nearly 130. We were able to update our growth factors amount as well, because that's based on the pupil numbers increase from one year to the next. So we've got nearly 130 million to work with that we've put through the models. The task and finish group met to discuss those. I'll just go through the results of the consultation because that happened after our last meeting. So the first question about, do you agree with the task and finish group that MFG should be set at 1%? And that was a resounding yes. Do you agree that with the task and finish group that the primary to secondary ratio should stay at 1 to 1.29? That was a big yes as well. Do you approve of the proposal to move the local funding factor rates towards the national funding formula rates? Again, that was a yes. Do you agree that the local authority should submit this application for our all through school? Again, that was a yes, and we have done that, and we have had the response through from the SFA already to say yes, they've approved that. And then the question about moving 0.5% of schools block funding from schools block to high needs block, and only 20% said yes and 80% said no. And the last question was about a falling roles fund, establishing that, and that was 63% said no for that. So we're not considering putting a falling roles fund in for next financial year. Taking all these factors into consideration, we met with the task and finish group. We looked at the 3 different levels of lump sum and whether there should be a cap or not. And we looked through the models and we decided that the lump sum in the middle of 128,150 was best for all schools. And also we decided there shouldn't be a cap because we put a 5% cap on that we've had in previous years, and that only affected 2 schools, one of which has high mobility. So the cap would actually reduce the funding that they were getting that they needed for their high mobility. So we decided that we would not have the cap this year for next year, and the NFF doesn't have a cap anyway. So putting this all through the model, I can just quickly show you. This would be this is the draft figures that we've got through that we'll be sending out to schools just to have a look at and comment on before the start of next term. So the 128 million, that is taking off the 1.5 million that I mentioned earlier about the growth fund. that we need to retain for next year. And the only schools that are losing out are those that have had a drop in pupil numbers of 4% or more compared to last year. But otherwise than that, everyone else has gained funding. But I'll send this out so everyone can see this properly, because I'm aware you've not obviously seen this before. But it's increased the ARPU's gone up for all levels. The minimum per pupil level funding's gone down because everyone has been funded correctly. It's working its way through, and minimum funding guarantee as well has reduced compared to last year, and we've not got a cap. So Darren, I don't know if you wanted to say anything.
If you could please, Darren, and then I'd like to come back and talk about the growth fund and then one or two other small issues.
Yeah,
Darren.
Yes, happy to. Can I thank Catherine for all the work that she's put into the different models? She summarised it really, really well there. There's not a huge amount to add, I don't think. Okay. We will come on to growth fund. I think it is good news. There's, as Catherine said, all the schools receive increased funding except those who've got a big change downwards in pupil numbers. Yeah, I think that's basically everything.
Okay.
Catherine summarised it brilliantly.
You can either scroll a bit further up so that I can see the school I'm interested in, or take that whole sheet off the screen.
Okay. This is just, yeah, right, everyone wants to look at their own, don't they?
Of course they do. Yeah, indeed they do. Okay. Could I ask you to step back to that sheet, the Appendix D, I think it was, in the in the revenue monitoring page, which shows the growth fund and what you are at the moment recommending as being the figure that we take out of DSG to allow for growth across the borough.
Yeah.
Again, if I can comment that this particular page is the most complete picture we've seen ever in terms of how that growth fund is put together. Do you think you could just share with us fairly briefly, if you could, how the 2023 figure has been built? We understand 2021 we're likely to carry forward an part of the contingency that we haven't spent. If you could just take us through how that 22-23 figure is, so that we can see what number you are recommending at the moment we deduct.
Okay, I actually did a bit of a summary that I thought was the easy. I don't know if you can see that, be slightly easier to see, I thought, rather than showing per school.
This team's good. Excellent, thank you.
So for 21-22, we retained 800,000 from the schools block funding. We had 475 that we carried forward. So we had 1.2 million available to spend this year. We did have 1.6 in the formula as income, but we've only retained 800 from that this year.
But for clarity, the difference between those two actually just went into the overall schools block funding, and therefore was parcelled out to schools and not kept back for growth. Yeah, okay.
That's right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, that just went into the APT for everybody. So I've got primary commitments that we've already given out, is that 426,000. Primary contingency, we've still got discussions with two classes of 30. So this is the 55,000 is from January to March funding. Secondary commitments is 300,000. That's what we've already given out to the schools that have increased their places this year. And the contingency is just for 60 places that's still in discussion for January. And this is the commitments for the new school. So this we've spent, we're committing £1 million just over for this year. So the difference between what we had available and what we're going to commit this year is the 260,000 that I mentioned before. That's gone into the underspend in this financial year on the revenue monitoring report.
And how much of that £1 million remains as a contingency rather than money, funding that we've actually allocated specifically to schools?
That is 163,000 nearly that still as contingency. So that number could increase if we decide in January that those classes aren't going to come on board.
Yeah, the estimated carry forward could increase from 259 to the better part of 400 if, for whatever reason, that contingency isn't used.
Yes, that's
okay,
right.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we should be in a better position to know that by the beginning of next term, I would hope. So carrying that forward, that 260 forward to next year. I estimate we got 1.6 million in. That 101.5 million is what I've put into the modelling that we just saw earlier for each school, which makes the available funding 1.8. So then that looks again at all that we went through all the figures with Piers, Darren and I, and what the primary actual commitments are, what's firmed up as the commitments, again, what the contingency is for primary and secondary. There's 240 places in contingency for secondary classes next year, and that's year 7, 8 and 9. And then we've got new schools coming on board as well, and the commitments and contingency for that. So if we take the 1.5, sorry, that I put into the modelling, plus the 260 carry forward, that would use everything up pretty much apart from £2,000. But if we did use the full 1.6 that I think we're going to get in our income, we'll have about 86,000 left to carry forward to the 23-24. But anything that's unused, if we do take that full 1.5 million out of 22-23's budget, anything that's not used will get carried forward into the following year.
Yes, but not allocated to schools to be used for the education of young people, which is if it was in the DSG, effectively it would be. And how much of that 1.6 million, 1589, is contingency?
Okay, so that's, we do the same adding up. We're including the new schools as well. That's 1.3 million.
So of the 1.6 million, 1.3 million is contingency.
Yes.
Okay. And what is our track record over the last 3 or 4 years of contingency compared to actual? What's been our carry forward in each year?
It's been about 200 each year. So the 475 was 2 years worth of about 200,000. And again, we've got about 200,000 estimated this year as well.
And it's quite possible that that 200,000 might be 400,000. May not be, but it might be. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So we are effectively taking from young people's schooling education, and we are allocating £1.3 million to the growth fund, which is not therefore going to support young people in their classrooms.
Yeah, but this is the only mechanism we have for funding new classes that need to be put.
I understand that. Okay. Lynn.
Can I just add something to that? So I completely take on board the sentiment, Paul, of what to say. I suppose just for clarity to say that we are still retaining it within the DSG and within the schools block, and any use of that money is still about ensuring that it's supporting children and young people in school settings. It doesn't get spent on anything else. It's purely, it would go back into ensuring we had sufficient places and go back out to school. So it doesn't go anywhere else. It's still, we retain it within the schools block of the DSG, but just for that purpose. I completely take on board your point that us getting this right is important, because it is a retention and it does reduce what that initial allocation that we do through the APT is. But I think even when you look at what, when we looked at the census numbers that Catherine referred to earlier in terms of updating the modelling we've done earlier and where we are now, and the fact that numbers have moved by 700,000, and the place planning challenges that I think we've all recognised within the borough, the number of families from overseas that have been moving in, etc. We have a really quite developing set of circumstances that feels like, while we don't have a crystal ball and it's very difficult to know how many families are going to move in, as Catherine said, this is the only route that we've got to set money aside to ensure that we can put on sufficient places that are needed, and getting that balance right is difficult. But the money does retain, it is still retained. I think I just want to make that clear, that we don't then go and use it for something else. It still is retained within the schools block, and the spending of that money is about on schools places. Although I do completely understand not over-egging the pudding in the first place is obviously very important.
Yeah. My grandchildren will be very pleased. Ginny?
Can I thank you for the understanding a lot more actually about the growth fund. Again, the reporting for this meeting just gets better and better. So I absolutely mean that. It's really genuine. On page 31.7, you talk through the formula for the growth fund, but it seems a slightly unfinished formula to me. So it makes sense to me that the minimum per pupil level sum is used. That's helpful and good clarity. It's also helpful to recognise that with so many academies that you've got to do the academic. So that's also a fantastic. What I'm still slightly opaque about is the growth fund funded then to schools on the numbers that the local authority request, to a bold class, so 30, or is it on the numbers that turn up? I hope you're going to say, so can I give you the answer, that it's going to be the numbers the local authority asks for, because that's what a school has to in good faith plan for. But of course then there can be enormous loss in that for the local authority. It's 6 and 2 3s, it's still education money, but hopefully you'll say yes to that answer I gave you.
Yeah, yes, it's yes. Yeah. So yes, we agree a class size, and then and then if only like 10 children show up, you've had to put on a teacher for that class, and so we still fund you based on a number agreed.
Darren?
Sorry.
Catherine?
Just
yeah, that's right. No, you're doing a great job.
Doing a fabulous job, Catherine. On that point that Ginny raised, it's there's the rub, certainly. And when we met last week, Heather's going to do some work on working out the best way to forward fund those places. And I think it's really important, particularly to note that the 240 secondary places in the contingency, Piers has asked that be 180 for year 7. And when we look back at the year just gone by, 101 places were funded, but only 67 children actually showed up in those schools. And there is a disparity between the 4 secondary schools in terms of the funding. And once this has been approved, I'm sure those schools are going to want to have a conversation with Heather about forward place funding for September 22-23. And as admissions is coming to a head at the end of February, there's a real need for that to be actioned very, very quickly.
Thank you, Darren. Shirley?
I go back to my point that I've raised previously when we look at this, is the importance of the numbers going forward and the predictions that Piers is presenting here, that they are accurate and they take into consideration all places. As I've mentioned before, we have been under allocation. So for me, money to be spent where, and I understand the admissions procedures, but I have again raised regarding how to place students and how not to have the churn through the movement with the waiting lists. So I think it's important to actually look at those numbers and make sure the numbers that were being predicted are accurate going forward if we're going to be offering out places that this money, as Paul has rightly said, is not going into the classroom, is going potentially elsewhere. We need to be really accurate on those figures that are going forward and the future planning of that, which I don't think that strategic plan has been looked at and has been addressed in terms of the numbers, certainly not in the last 4.5 years. I haven't seen new numbers coming through with accurate data on it going forward.
Thank you, Shirley. I echo that. This is a forecast, and the one thing you can guarantee about a forecast is it will be wrong. The challenge is getting it as close to accurate as possible, and our track record, our joint track record, hasn't been great. It's erred on the side of prudence. That is a very good place to be. I'm a little concerned that we're erring way too, but that's really up to us to discuss. Are there other comments from colleagues? Darren? That might be just hand going up. Darren, you've got a further comment? If not, I'll move on.
Yes, I do. Sorry, Chair. I was having trouble with Teams. One thing to point out is that there's a 95% rule or methodology that Piers has applied. So because there are fixed costs and variable costs to starting up a new class, that the amount per child times by the number of funded places is then reduced by 5%. So it's important that we say that, and that's there. It's not something that Catherine and I made up. It was in the models already for discussion if needed. And a huge caveat on the 2023-24 figures, that they are very provisional and don't include any secondary contingencies in 2022-23. So Catherine's number right at the bottom of 836,000 in surplus that year is take with a real pinch of salt. And what will hopefully happen during the course of this year, we'll be able to update these figures and then look at actual spends for 2021-22, projections for 22-23, and then firm up those projections for 23-24.
Okay. Thank you, Darren. And once again, Catherine, thank you very much for Darren and Catherine and the team that's worked on this for putting these figures together. I'd like to move to asking whether colleagues are comfortable that we have 1.5 as a vote, effectively, that we have £1.58 million as the growth fund figure for the budget for 22-23. If there are no further comments, no further questions on it, so could I ask you please to raise your hand if you are in favour of the number being 1.58, well, I'll call it 1.6 million for the moment. Okay, I'm seeing 1, 2, 3, 4. Thank you. So I can see 11 hands up voting for that number. Could I ask those who think the number is inappropriate, i.e. they would choose not to support 1.6 million as the growth fund? I've got one hand up for that. So, oh no, yeah, I had one hand up for that. So, Madeline, please, if you could note that we had 11 people voting for and 1 person voting against, please. Thank you, Catherine. That's really cool. Can I now make another little tweak? So, in January, we will know whether the contingency that Piers has put aside for the possible primary and secondary classes, whether that's taken place, because come January the 2nd or 3rd or 5th or whatever, we're all starting school. Assuming it hasn't been put in place, there's £170,000 there that could be added to the DSG allocation for schools for 22-23, because it's now not being spent in this year.
Yeah, I'd adjust that 1.5 down because we'll just use that carry forward through. So when we know in January that 1.5, but we've set aside to cover it, that's it, that incorporates the 260,000 carry forward that we're expecting. If we're not using that, and I know before we have to submit the model, I can use that, the contingency we don't use for this year, and put it through as increased carry forward, and therefore reduce that 1.5 down.
Yeah, I think what we're saying is we're recognising that 269 or whatever the number is should be carried forward. If we find on January the 5th that the extra 170 that at the moment is a contingency in this year, if that is not needed, that is the figure that's deducted from the 1586.
Yeah.
So it could be that the budget for next year growth fund is actually 1.4 blah, i.e. the 1.6 reduced by almost 200,000 because we've not spent it.
Yes.
Okay, and just a quick, are colleagues happy that that is the approach that we should take if we don't spend the remaining contingency for this year? Liz? I'm hoping that's a yes. You're happy with that?
Yes, that was a yes.
Thank you. Is there anybody that thinks that's an inappropriate approach and we should add the 170 to the existing 1.6 and make the number bigger? I'm not seeing any comments against that. So if we can say, so thank you on that piece. I'm desperately trying to finish this in 15 minutes so that we can all close at 12. As Ginny will tell you, when I get really upset, I can get very upset and sometimes be a little unprofessional, which, forgive me, is not a great trait to have. In the recent days, I read and understood that although my belief had been School Forum had asked that there not be any move of 0.5% from the schools block fund to the high needs block fund, and we had gone out to consultation, and as well as School Forum saying no, the consultation also said no. Within their powers, the officers within Wokingham had applied to the ESFA for a disapplication, i.e. to move 0.5% from schools block into high needs block. In terms of the powers of the borough and the local authority and the officers, they were quite entitled to do that. My immense frustration was that I had believed, and forgive me, I thought everybody at School Forum had believed that by School Forum saying no, it shouldn't be done, and by a consultation saying no, it shouldn't be done, that effectively committed the borough to not making a disapplication. I was wrong, and I was wrong on two cases. One, if you were to look back into the reports at the last meeting, there is a line in the finance report that, and Heather and Lynn were kind to, as you can forgive me, kind to share it with me, to point out my failing. There was a line in the report that said, should the majority of schools not support the continuation of the approach, i.e. we won't transfer 0.5%, then a disapplication will be submitted by the local authority by the 19th of November. I did not see that, even though I recognise it was in the report, and officers did carry through on that particular line. Lynn, you got your hand up. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I just wanted to, so at this point of the report anyway, was just to say, I suppose, some context around the decision making. So obviously, you know, as you've rightly said, that's exactly the context in terms of the previous schools forum discussion at the October meeting, and obviously the outcome of the consultation with schools. And as forum will recognise from previous years, there's obviously within the guidance, there is the facility for the local authorities to submit a disapplication in that case. It was, I think, fair to say it's not an easy decision. It's always a DCS decision. Dan's presentation earlier in terms of setting out where we are on the high needs block and the scale of the financial challenge that we are facing within Wokingham in terms of ensuring that we meet the needs of our children and young people with SEND is clearly considerable. As a local authority, we need to and are expected to ensure that we explore all opportunities and all levers available to us in terms of meeting that financial challenge. Paul, I would just like to add that while you're right that it was reflected in the report, we did also feed it into the school business manager briefing. I'd just like to add an apology that we clearly didn't pull that out enough at the last meeting, and in terms of the discussion. We've worked really hard about transparency of decision making, and just having something written in a report is only part of the equation. Obviously, we look for everyone to have had time to read and digest the reports before the meeting, but as officers, we look to try and ensure that we pull out the right points for comment at the discussion, and in reflection, that didn't happen at the October meeting. So you have our apologies for that. It was not an easy decision as a local authority, and that DCS decision is set in the context of the financial challenges that we have. The timing of it didn't work in our favour, so the information that Dan presented today is the outcome of a good 6-9 months really detailed work, a lot of discussions both internally and with colleagues around this table and others before we were in a position to put something in the public domain such as this. This is a public and an open meeting. Ideally, we would have been able to do that and bring that to you some months ago, and that would have been the context that would have informed our collective discussion about how we viewed that 0.5% transfer. We weren't able to do that, and that unfortunately added to the complexity of the timing we had. It is recognised that, you know, that transfer and a disapplication to move that transfer no doubt reduces. It reduces the money that's available through the APT for individual schools. It was taken on board the fact that we can do that without changing the recommended factors that we apply. That doesn't make it okay, and I completely accept that, but we looked at the recommended factors that we would apply into the schools block budget in terms of lump sum and the approach. In previous years, if we'd looked at a transfer, you wouldn't necessarily be able to make those same factors work with taking a transfer. That is the case for the proposal for the coming financial year, but it doesn't negate the fact that we accept that it does take money out of that formula. to fund individual schools. And we certainly wouldn't want it to be seen that, you know, there was a consultation and discussion and that somehow the local authority had ignored the views that had been expressed through that, because that's categorically not the case. It's the difficulty of the challenge of where we find ourselves financially and ensuring that we are evidencing to the ESFA about and others as a collective responsibility that all levers available to us to look at resources for the high needs block are explored. But you know, we fully take on frustration and the disappointment that might feel on behalf of members given the outcomes of the consultation.
Thank you, Lynn. My understanding is that ESFA have been provided with the information that both School Forum and the consultation would have not wanted the 0.5% to be transferred, and the ESFA have not yet said whether they will accept the local authority's recommendation that it is transferred. There is still, I don't know what the likelihood is, but it is predominantly, they may well be influenced by our vote. I think that the challenge, certainly for me, is less about the fact that it was made, the fact that there was, I think, insufficient communication that regardless of the outcomes, you were going to make it. That hurt. That hurt a lot. But thank you for explaining why. Colleagues, other comments, if you have any. Liz, hi.
Hi. By taking it from the schools, does it not feel like that we've got it to spare? And does it not hide? You said that we are, you know, worst funded local authority for element 2. Does this not, you know, sort of mask it? Should we not still be saying, you know, pushing that factor?
Absolutely, Liz, and that is absolutely the case. You know, this is about, you know, it's a real difficult balance because we understand the pressure that individual schools are under, and as a local authority and a group of offers, so this having to move from one block to another is not where any of us would prefer to be. There is a specific funding formula for each block, and in terms of feeding that back, you know, we would look for each individual block to be funded appropriately, and therefore without the need to have that conversation unless there was a very particular collectively agreed funding decision that we were taking. In terms of masking it, we are being blatantly clear on everything. As part of the disapplication process, Chair, as you've rightly said, the ESFA will look at the ask for school forum minutes. They will look at evidence before. They will look at decision making. We have been completely transparent around that. And absolutely, in terms of that wider high needs block management plan and that ongoing discussion with the ESFA, we will absolutely not lose sight of that, Liz, in terms of feeding that into the discussion. It is not a long-term solution. You know, we know that we've submitted a disapplication for Wokingham in the past and it was refused. Evidence from around the country, there's a large number of local authorities have gone down similar routes. Evidence suggests it's highly unlikely that where Schools Forum and schools do not support that approach, it is unlikely that the Secretary of State would overturn that view and that would agree with the local authority. But it's about flagging that with the enormity of the pressure, there are options within the guidance that allow us to do it, and that we need to explore that as part of the discussion. But it absolutely would not. It's not about suggesting there is additional money not needed within the schools block list. Categorically not.
Thank you. Other comments? Looks like I was the only one that really got thermonuclear. Shirley.
No, you're not the only one, Paul. I thought, like you pointed out, being professional is really important. So sometimes you leave your microphone off. And I have to say, you know, the suggestion that the local authority, you know, is in trouble financially, I would just say, take a look in the mirror. I've been here for 4 years and I've continuously listened and continuously heard about the underfunding and continuously listened about how money, I would say, has not gone in the right places. So to me, it suggests that schools aren't in severe deficit. I've made staff not be allowed to buy anything for 4 years. They've got zero budgets and we've educated children on zero budgets. So for me, this just smacks in the face. And I think it makes it worse when I hear that actually you know, the DfE are unlikely to support it. It just feels like, well, we're going to do it anyway, just to irritate all the people who have worked on the ground and taken money away from students in the classroom, has taken money away from staff in the classroom, has had to face redundancies in the classroom. It doesn't sit very comfortably either. So, you know, I'm going alongside what the chair said. I'm just really disappointed that this has happened and been done, and it does make the vote. It just feels like it doesn't matter what we say, we'll do as we'll do. So I'll leave it at that.
Sarah?
Hi, Sean here. Yes, just to express the disappointment. Yeah, we discuss these things, we think about them a lot, and I guess we believe we have a voice, and it does feel a little bit like we haven't on this particular matter. So that's it.
Brian?
I think I know just how disappointed and how frustrated I was along with Paul during those meetings that we have had. I would hope that if the DfE does approve it, that you'd be very clear how that 0.5% will be spent, because the last time it wasn't clear. And I think School Forum, you owe that to School Forum.
Absolutely, Brian, I can't agree more with that. In the instance where the Secretary of State approves it, then categorically we'll be coming back to Forum to look at a collective decision on how we ensure that funding is targeted appropriately over the next financial year.
Thank you, Lynn. Rebecca? Rebecca?
Sorry, just unmuting myself. Just moving forward, obviously there is lots of difficult decisions that need to be made from both sides here. But moving forward, how do we feel as a borough? So I'm asking the officers here about how we're going to communicate this better moving forward, because obviously this is quite regrettable, and you know there's a real sense of feeling here that people do feel, you know, they've been consulted and ignored for whatever the reasons are. So moving forward, how do we feel we're going to best manage this?
So I think, just to add, Rebecca, I think there's definitely learning from this. You know, we've worked really hard collectively about ensuring we have transparency and that we really build relationships within the Schools Forum discussion. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? And I can only apologise for that it wasn't made clear enough in the discussion, and that we didn't set about the communication in the right way. So absolutely, we will take that on board and ensure that you know, that we do better in future.
Thank you, Lynn.
I just feel that sometimes there can be a lack of trust if there's a consultation. You know, just moving forward, if there's a consultation, there can then be a lack of trust from the people that are involved in that consultation of whether their views or their thoughts will be taken forward in the future. So I think that's really important to take on board. I'll be quiet.
Thank you. No, that's fine.
Sorry.
Karina, I know you've got to leave fairly quickly. You have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, you know, we started off this meeting with conversations about a partnership in Wokingham, and I think this decision isn't going to help us head teachers feel that actually strategically we will be involved in making those decisions collectively, because I think a lot of the head teachers will feel very disappointed and upset. And when we're talking about a partnership, isn't that the whole point of this, that if we're going to have a vote, then it needs to be listened to? I just want that for the record. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Rebecca, I think you're absolutely right. We can't go back and redo what we did. We've got to learn to go forward. I think we've got to, School Forum's got to say to the officer group, I don't think there was any doubt that you did what you thought was the right thing. And I think if you'd have said at the time when we were voting, you know, we have a responsibility that is wider than this group here, but we still want to understand what your opinion is. And no, we will provide that opinion to ESFA, but please understand our responsibility to the wider business is that we're going to apply for a disapplication. I think we'd have all gone, okay, understand that, thank you. You know, I think it's the fact that that wasn't apparent and open at the time, but we can't go back. We are where we are, and it may be that it doesn't get approved. And
I think, and you know, just to, I completely agree with that Chair, but just to add, it was a mission rather than deliberate. There was never any intention to be anything other than transparent about it.
I get that. It doesn't help that Carol's moved on, Sal's moved, you know, so suddenly you're left holding a baby that really wasn't, it didn't come from you. So thank you. Colleagues, any other comments and forgive me, we've taken up a lot of time on that. Any other comments around the budget for 22-23, or can we leave Catherine and Lynn over the Christmas holiday as they get more information from DFE, as we understand whether the 170 grand contingency on growth is going to be spent, to come up with a final set of figures under Darren and his group's guidance? And I'm hoping, then thank you very much. Thank you all for that particular item. Could we move on quickly to item 20, review of de-delegated services? I'm aware this is very much a maintained school issue, but nevertheless, could we table that and talk through that, please? I'm not sure who's doing the de-delegated piece.
That's me. Sorry. Okay, so this the report today just brings back an update on the work. So Schools Board will remember that almost a year ago, when we were looking at de-delegation for the current financial year, we committed to a review of the remaining de-delegated items over the course of this year for 22-23 budget setting, and the report back today is an update on that and the work to date. The review, we started off as one group. All maintained schools were contacted and encouraged to be involved in the process, and we had a number of volunteers, and thank you to them for their time and effort into the review. We've subsequently split into two smaller groups just in terms of covering off the de-delegated items, and each one has looked at each delegated item for the current year in turn. I think one of the key elements of pointing out of this is that while a lot of our discussion in the past has obviously been about financial sustainability, given that de-delegated items are only an option for maintained mainstream schools, and that actually as schools have academised and the number of maintained schools that we have has fallen, that's provided a real context. And what came out of the discussions with the groups, and one group certainly really in particular and really strongly, is the number of maintained schools that could potentially go down that route, and the sort of short and medium term position, and really changing. We've had one or two schools academising a year in the past, and that potentially we're coming into a period of time where it's significantly more than that in a shorter period of time. That fundamentally completely changes the landscape and our ability to de-delegate around anything. So with that background, we've looked at each of the de-delegated services against that. Some of them move, so the costs involved in those services, for some of them the costs reduce as the number of maintained schools reduce, and we can build that sort of relationship. Some of them don't. Some of them has a very fixed cost base regardless of the number of maintained schools that we have. So the report just sets out for each of the de-delegated areas just a little bit of background of what was discussed, some summary information that was in there, and then the recommendations coming out of the discussions. If I'm just very quickly to just run through that. So for the de-delegated contingency, we've obviously touched again on that on the revenue monitoring report, and the fact that we didn't de-delegate any further funds in the current financial year, but that we had 55,000 brought forward from last financial year. To date, there has been no call on it within year, and there was a good discussion in the group about it's a relatively small sum, but equally it's the only place that we're currently allowed to still have something to support maintained schools within the funding arrangements. So the recommendations coming out from the group are on that the principle of a de-delegated contingency be retained, but that no additional funds be de-delegated for the 22-23 financial year, but we retain the £55,000 balance for that purpose. That there remains an annual review undertaken to consider whether, if there was a drawdown, whether we might want to top up the balance to the sort of 55 or another level going forward, but that we set a time frame of say 2 or 3 years, so that actually if this is a contingency that's just sat there and that we're not looking to use it, and that annual review demonstrates that there's been no call on it and there's no practical use for it, that we will look to have a time limit on how forward we carry that forward, and where we make an end point to that position. And then lastly, obviously, that we we collectively look at the criteria and the process just to refresh that and the communication around that, so that all maintained schools are really clear about the fact that we hold that fund and what the process is, should there be circumstances to look to draw down on that. In terms of supply cover, so again, we looked at this from a number of angles. One of the, in terms of the detailed work that was done, what allowed us to identify is that the costs that are charged against this is something that happens through the payroll system. In terms of one of the benefits for maintained schools is that they don't need to claim the money, if you like. It's done through the payroll system and that how things are charged. But actually, once we were able to get underneath the information and look together at that as a group, it became apparent that in previous years there had been costs charged against that were not in relation to maintained mainstream schools. They were maintained settings. But for example, there have been some Addington costs that had been charged against that in previous years, even though Addington are not part of that dedelegation process to feed into it. So that's obviously flagged up some processes that are resolved, and we're putting that right for this financial year and ensuring that that's correct going forward, that would no longer happen. The group looked at a number of options, and again, the sort of pros and cons and the relative cost base of continuing to do it. It's important to state that the supply arrangements are more a sort of cost sharing arrangement administered by the council rather than an insurance policy that we go out and commission on behalf of schools. So there's no externally commissioned insurance broker involved in this. It is purely more a sort of cost sharing initiative. And the group, certainly there was some really useful information fed in about what it might cost if schools were to look to basically purchase their own arrangements on the open market, and some conversation about what academies might do, etc. But taking all that into account, the group's recommendation was that we continue to de-delegate supply cover for the 22-23 financial year on a per pupil basis, and that we set that each year based on looking at a 3-year rolling average for maintained schools to ensure that we get that set. From our point of view, in terms of improving transparency, when we've looked at those internal processes, we'll also ensure that there's actually much more sufficient information and clearer information on how that's progressing during the year that we bring back, so that everyone's got real clarity on what the drawdown is during the year, because we're aware that that level of scrutiny hasn't been on the spend in that area up until this point. Licenses and subscriptions, effectively what has been getting charged through there, again in terms of us unpicking it, has been around 50% of the cost of one of the systems that's used broadly across learning and achievement and partnerships in terms of supporting schools. Discussion around that, effectively just jumping quickly to the group recommendation on that. There is no clear evidence, even from an officer viewpoint, that we can see that would make it appropriate to continue to de-delegate the system in that way. We 50% fund it through the Central School Services block just now, and 50% through de-delegation. And in conjunction with that internal review that we are looking at, the group recommendation is that we will remove it as de-delegated. We will fund the full cost through the Central School Services block for the 22-23 financial year. So we'll obviously bring that back when we consider that budget setting after Christmas. But then there will be a further review work within the council. The system that we currently use is due. There's a full re-tender exercise currently is about to be launched that will be for the 23-24 financial year onwards, that either we will have a new contract in place, potentially new system, depending on the outcome of that re-tender exercise. As part of that, we will get far greater clarity on the financial model that sits within the contract and the prices that will allow us to relook at this. If on that demonstrates non-statutory costs associated with the system, then for 23-24 onwards, we will look at that in terms of the traded offer across learning achievement and partnership, and how that we look to ensure not that we have a systems traded offer, that those costs are appropriately factored into the traded offer for those non-statutory services that use the system functionality. I hope I'm aware I'm going through this really quickly, but I hope that makes some sense. So effectively, we would be saying that will not be de-delegated from this point on, and it will effectively be removed for the 22-23 dedelegation decisions in January. Moving on to the two services that provide us the greatest challenge because they are staffing based. If we think about those the other dedelegated systems, they flex depending on the number of maintained schools, for example. When we look at support to underperforming ethnic minority groups and bilingual learners, and then on to the Foundry Primary Behaviour Support Service, the Outreach Service, those are two services that are predominantly staffing driven. And therefore the costs and the overall costs of the service involved obviously don't flex with the number of maintained schools. There's not, you will see from the report, there's not a final recommendation out of the group for both of those, but just to update on the fact that we are actively exploring we have options in place that we are actively exploring to bring back that will mean that we are looking to not look to dedelegate those for the next financial year. So for Foundry, for example, this fully fits into the wider discussion we're having around the Foundry review, the outreach service, the outreach conversation that Dan referred to earlier, that how we look at how we set and commission Foundry budget overall in terms of the high needs block and how we explore that appropriate cost recovery model that we support them with that would then be really transparent and applicable to all schools. So that's the route that we are actively exploring just now. The same with in terms of the support to underperforming EMG and bilingual learners. The plan is that we would not seek to dedelegate those and come back with the work through proposition of how those would be funded for the 22-23 financial year.
Excellent, Lynn. Thank you very much. I appreciate you speeding through that. My understanding is that this is at the moment for our information. We're not looking at making any decisions or agreeing any record. That will come as part of the de-delegated decision approval steps when we put the budget together in January.
Yeah, absolutely. But what we'll also be doing, and obviously following up with the task and finish groups that have been working on this to finish off the final recommendations, is that we will also go back out to all maintained schools to ensure that they've seen the report that came today and any further information, so that, and I know, Karina, I don't know whether you want to add in, we talked about how we ensure that for those that take those decisions back in Schools Forum in the new year, you know, that everyone feels confident that we've been as transparent with all schools as that we can on how we reach those recommendations.
Thank you. Yeah, Karina.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say thank you, Lynn. That was really comprehensive summary. And yes, Louisa and I, Louisa Woodley, are going to plan to try and feed back to all head teachers on what we've discussed so far and the findings, Lynn, so that there is a comprehensive collective voice when we come back to forum to vote on it.
Thanks, Karina. And can I just add as well, just thanks to everyone that has been involved, because we appreciate it's taken us longer to get to this point than we ideally would like, and everyone's input into the group has been invaluable. And I think, you know, we've uncovered things both as officers and forum colleagues that we weren't aware of. So I think the process has been really, really worthwhile and worth the time and effort. And we hope that what this does is give us a more financially sustainable way through that resolves some of those annual decision making uncertainties that comes from Foundry and other services by the nature of dedelegation.
Lovely, thank you. Liz, did you want to make a comment?
Yep, I just want to say thank you, because that's all that we want is transparency. It's one of those things that's just been this de-delegated lump sum, and like you said, it's not been sort of investigated, so thank you for that.
Excellent, thank you. Then if there are no further comments, Lynn, thank you very much. That just gives a great update, and it therefore means when you come in January to look at these numbers, it's not going to be uninformed, it's now well informed. Thank you. And if I can repeat the comment from Liz and from Karina, thank you to all of those that are supporting this group, or these groups plural. If there are no further issues on de-delegated services, Brian and I had talked and asked to have item 21 included on the agenda, which is a conversation about declining roles, and particularly the fact that the geography of the borough and the location, particularly of some of the primary schools, is such that declining roles is not a function of inadequacy in any educational form. It's a sense of the geography of the borough is moving, and should we be looking at it again? I'm conscious it's now 12:15. I'm conscious that is a topic that will take 20 minutes or so. I'm going to suggest, and Brian, I'm looking for your support on this, if not or not, that we take that agenda item and move it to January. It's not time critical, and put it on the January agenda. Does that make sense?
So, yeah, it does. Yeah, yeah. It's also we've moved it into the admissions working group as well, where we're looking at the boundaries. So it all fits in well.
Then great, it might spin back and we get some feedback from there. Excellent, thank you. If everybody's, unless anybody's got a particular issue that says no, we'd like to talk about it now, I'd like to move on to the forward plan. And the forward plan is in the at the back of the agenda, or the back of the agenda items. I think we've added for January an item. Is there anything anybody wants to add at this stage for March? Doesn't look like it. We've got a high needs block update, which will be important, and other items. No, so thank you. If I can move on then to any other business. So I'm going to go down through what I can see on my screen as colleagues. Brian, have you got anything more?
No, thanks. No.
Chris, have you got anything more? Chris, yeah, okay. Carol?
No.
Karina?
No, thanks.
Dan? No, I don't think it's down there. Darren?
Sorry, no, thank you.
Okay, that's great, Darren.
Yes, just one quick thing, thanks. Please, Chair, if that's okay. It's a request. I hope I'm speaking on behalf of the secondary heads. At this time of year, it is not helpful for SEN to send us consultations and expect the returns to be made within the Christmas holidays. It happened to multiple secondary head teachers last year. So either can Wokingham SEN not send out any consultations for 6 to 7 transfer before the Christmas holidays, or if they do, can the deadline be extended to mid to late January, please?
Thank you. Heather, is that in your?
Oh yeah, I'll liaise with Daniel.
Thank you. Thanks, Darren. Emma. Hello, Emma.
Hi, no, thank you.
Okay, Ginny.
Yeah, absolutely concur. Darren's absolutely right. That is on behalf of all the secondary heads. Can I suggest, Heather, that none is sent out, because once you send them, you start the ticking clock of statutory duty. So we would ask the local authority not to send them out till after the Christmas holiday. It ruins Senco's happiness, well-being, and that of head teachers in the precious time that we might have off, or COVID accepting.
Will do.
Thank you. Hayley, anything you would like to raise?
No, thank you.
Heather, anything you've got on?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Ian T.
No, I'm fine, thank you, Brian. Paul, sorry, thank you, Paul.
Ian Morgan. Sorry, Catherine's chairing, so we'll be fine on that. So Ian Morgan.
No, any other business, Paul. I was just looking, and this is just going back to the forward planning. Sorry.
Yep.
Early years budget is on the
January agenda.
January, which needs to be signed off then, because we're not actually going to get the budget, are we, Catherine, until Lynn?
Yeah, I was just going to actually just add that on reflection for both high needs block and early years, that we will look to bring something back in January, but whether that's the final decision or whether we do what we did last year and that we take that at the March meeting. I think you're right, Ian, particularly on the early years, depending on how quickly we get the information in and then having time to discuss and meet with the task and finish group. We would need to have the reports published for Schools Forum the first week in the new year to meet the deadline, so that's probably more realistic.
Let's take a decision not to have early years in January and remove that pressure. So Madeline, please, if you could pick up that on the revised agenda. Lynn, would you still want to bring something for high needs block to January?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, fine. So we'll leave high needs block budget, even though we may not make a decision there. We'll leave it on there as an advisory point. Thank you. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Paul.
Chair, anything from your? Oh, sorry, Catherine. Anything from your perspective?
No, thank you.
Okay, no problem. Liz.
No, thank you.
Lynn, anything further? Anything else on your agenda?
Thanks, Chair.
Madeline, anything that you would like to raise?
No, thank you.
Ali.
No, thank you.
Julia.
No, thank you.
Sean.
No, thank you, Paul.
And Rebecca.
No, thank you.
Great. Sarah.
No, thank you.
Shirley.
Do you leave me to last on purpose, Chair? Only that I would ask, if possible, that the numbers for secondary places could be brought to forum as soon as they're available, including the out of county numbers, so that we can actually have a look at those at forum, just in relation to the budget we talked about earlier.
And is that, Lynn, is that within your remit?
I can certainly pick up with Heather and see what we can bring together to see what
Thank
we
you.
can.
Zoe has been working on it, so Zoe should have. I know she's working actively on those figures now. So I know the system's not in place to send it out, but I know she is working on it to get it to us. But I think it's important that once we have them, they come to forum as well.
Sure, we'll certainly pick that
So
up.
could we add that as an agenda item for the January meeting, please?
Thank you, Chair. Nothing else. Have a nice Christmas.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you, everybody. I'm hoping I haven't missed anybody. Forgive me if I have. I'm running down my Teams list. So if there's anybody I've missed who's got any AOB, put your hands up now. If not, I've not seen anything. Then can I wish you all a great Christmas holiday break? I hope you do get a break. And best wishes for the new year. And what I hope, what I'm sure we all hope will be not too heavily COVID affected. So thank you, everybody, for attending this morning. Speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Paul. So take care. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.